Welcome to The Explainer. You know those political arguments that feel less like a discussion and more like a trap? Well, today we're decoding a really unique, and let's be honest, pretty unconventional survival guide made for those exact moments.
So, to set the stage, the source material kicks off with this really dramatic comparison. It draws a straight line from the public shamings in Maoist China to the kind of toxic arguments a lot of us have today. Now, that is a heavy parallel for sure, but it's meant to show just how high the psychological stakes can feel in our modern world.
All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to define the problem, what the author calls a struggle session. Then we'll get into the solution, this idea of political mirroring, before diving into the actual tools you can use. And finally, we'll check out the author's proposed path to get out of this whole toxic cycle.
Okay, let's dive in. To really get a handle on the solution being offered, we first have to get a crystal clear picture of the problem it's trying to solve, this so-called modern struggle session.
So, according to this framework, a struggle session is not your average disagreement, no way. It's a very specific kind of fight where one person, called the subject, isn't looking for a debate, they're looking for a confession, a total admission that your way of thinking is politically wrong.
And this is the part that hits home. This isn't just some historical concept. The argument is that this is happening all around us. You know, that family dinner that just goes completely off the rails? Or that social media thread that turns into a total pile-on? Yep, that's the danger zone we're talking about.
So, if that's the danger, what's the defense? Well, the source offers up this whole philosophy called political mirroring. And to really get it, we need to meet the cast of characters the author has created for us to navigate these situations.
First up, we have the subject. In this whole drama, they are the emotional engine. They aren't looking for a rational back and forth. What they want is perfect harmony. For you to be a perfect mirror reflecting their own beliefs right back at them. And any little crack in that mirror feels like a personal attack.
And on the flip side, you've got the mirror agent. This is the person in the conversation who realizes, hey, wait a minute, this has gone completely irrational, and they have a really critical choice to make. Do I fight this? Do I just reflect their views back at them to stay safe? Or do I just get out of here?
And last, there's the potential victim. According to this view, this is what you become the exact moment you decide to actually challenge the subject. The second you disagree, you're risking this huge, out-of-proportion emotional backlash, what the source calls stigma, or even punishment.
So now that we know the players, let's look at the toolkit. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the source gets super specific, even giving us this unique, almost mathematical way for the mirror agent to handle things. It's called the struggle session calculus. Now, I know it looks a little intimidating, but it's really meant to be a simple, practical tool. It's like a mental checklist to help you decide, in the moment, if staying in this crazy argument is even worth the cost.
So here's how it breaks down. I is the pleasure the other person gets if you just agree with them. P is the personal pain it costs you to do that. The formula basically forces you to ask a really cold, hard question. Is making them happy worth your own suffering? Or is it just better for everyone to walk away?
The text also points out this very specific and pretty memorable tactic it calls an emotional support child. And no, we're not talking about service animals. This is when someone uses the emotional reaction of a child or even an older person as this kind of unbeatable shield to win a political point. And this example from the text just nails the concept. A parent blames someone else's politics because their child started crying over a t-shirt. It immediately turns the child's innocence into a weapon and makes any kind of counter-argument feel totally heartless.
And that's why this tactic is so powerful, right? Because, like the text asks, what's the rational way to respond to that? If you argue the point, you look like a monster who makes kids cry. It's suggested that the only real winning move is to recognize the tactic for what it is and just escape. Now, tactics like the emotional support child are really effective, but the source says they all serve one primary weapon, political stigma. This is all about actively shaming and punishing your opponents until they just shut up.
To explain this, we get this idea of stigmatic totems. The whole point is that everyday objects can get so filled with political meaning that they're not even objects anymore. A simple hat or a flag becomes this powerful symbol that's used to either praise your side or, more likely, shame the other.
And yup, you guessed it, we get another formula to try and measure this desire for punishment. If that first calculus was about whether you should stay in a fight, this stigmatic calculus is about figuring out the desire to inflict harm on someone just because of their politics. The really wild insight here is that it's a multiplication of bad feelings. The formula suggests that the more unhappy a subject feels about something,
And the more happiness they think their opponent is feeling, the more severe the punishment they want to dish out.
So to explain the weird thinking behind all this, the source breaks down two kinds of self-deception. Micro-deludes are those stubborn, personal beliefs you won't let go of. Macro-deludes are those huge, sweeping narratives that just ignore all the evidence. The argument is that these two things are basically the fuel that keeps these toxic arguments burning.
All right, so after diagnosing the problem and all the weapons, the source actually lays out an escape plan. This is supposed to be a path to get you from being an emotional subject in these fights to becoming a rational mirror agent. The first step to getting better, we're told, is to recognize you might be what the author calls an intellectual hostage. That's the feeling that you're trapped, you know? Like you're in a conversation or even a whole community where speaking your mind feels way too dangerous. Like you're constantly being watched by your own side. And to break free from that, the ultimate solution offered is this 8-step recovery program. And yeah, it is explicitly modeled on addiction recovery programs. It frames this kind of irrational emotional politics not as some moral failing, but as a destructive habit that you can actually break with discipline and a real commitment to thinking clearly. This whole framework is definitely a complex and pretty unusual way to look at our disagreements. It's less about winning and more about, well, strategic survival. And it kind of leaves us with this final thought. If you actually applied this lens to your own life, how would it change how you listen, how you speak, and maybe most importantly, how you choose your battles?